Yeah, so this evening we're going to be carrying on our exploration of the Dhammapada. So, who out of all of you was here the last couple of weeks? Okay, so a few of you were. So we're doing a series at the moment on this this kind of ancient text called the Dhammapada. I've got two different versions here. Different translations, basically. So we've got a translation by Sangharakshita, who's the founder of our order and movement, and then I've got a translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. So the Dhammapada, some of you will know this if you were here, but one way to describe it is kind of like, you could think of it as close as we've got to the words of the Buddha. So they're really, really ancient texts, and they're like sayings of the Buddha. And it's quite a short text, and what's lovely about it is it's sort of they're quite pithy. So it's the sort of thing where you can read a couple of verses and then reflect on them, and then even better, learn them by heart, and then sort of reflect on them, as you're kind of walking around or going about your daily life. And just, read a verse, reflect on it, read a verse, reflect on it. Who was here the first week with Kusalasara, where she was... Oh, lots of you were. Okay, so lots of you will know that verse that we did by heart then. So if I say experiences are, somebody else can shout out, and we'll do sort of, Yeah, preceded by mind, led by mind, produced by mind. Yeah. What happens when one speaks or acts with an impure mind? Let's start with an impure mind. What happens if one speaks or acts with an impure mind?
Suffering. Suffering follows.
Yeah.
The hooves of the ox follow the wheels of the cart.
That's right, except the other way round. You've got the cart before the ox, but literally. But yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I knew there had to be hooves.
Yeah, that's right. So that first verse we looked at, which is, and I think this is quite interesting because we started off with that first verse, didn't we? Experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, produced by mind. And it talks about what happens when one acts or speaks with both an impure mind and a pure mind, i.e. suffering follows if you speak or act with an impure mind. Happiness follows like a shadow that never departs if you act with a pure mind. And so that sort of set the scene in the first sort of week. And then last week we had Suryanaga, who was talking about those verses, he abused me, he beat me, he robbed me. And it's almost like we've gone from, okay, how the mind works to, okay, well, if you think in a certain way with the mind, and then this evening, it's almost like we're going to the next stage of like, well, what happens if you actually try to practice? So if you try to put these teachings into practice, like what are some of the things that can happen, basically? And I think that's quite an interesting development over the few weeks. And we're sort of slowly working our way through the verses of the Dhammapada. So I'll reveal tonight's verses to you. I hope you can read these. My handwriting's not very good, and I had a bit of board marker dukkha, board marker suffering. You always it's like a sort of an eternal law. I don't think the Buddha actually talked about this, but it's a kind of an eternal law that you start writing with a board marker and then it starts running out. And then that's what happens. But so these are our verses, and I'll just read this out and we can reflect on that for a moment. And then what I'm going to do is sort of unpack these verses tonight. So maybe you could kind of sit, in, not in meditation posture, but you could sit and close your eyes if you want to, and I'll read this to you, and then they'll be on the flip chart and you can come back to it. But just to let these verses percolate in. So, just as the wind blows down a weak tree, so Mara overthrows one who lives for pursuit of pleasure, seeing the unlovely as lovely, whose senses are uncontrolled, who is immoderate in food, lazy and of inferior vigour. As the wind does not blow down a rocky mountain, so Mara does not overthrow one who lives seeing the unlovely as lovely, whose senses are controlled, who is moderate in food, and who is filled with faith and earnest effort. I'll just read that again. Just as the wind blows down a weak tree, so Mara overthrows one who lives for the pursuit of pleasure, seeing the unlovely as lovely, whose senses are uncontrolled, who is immoderate in food, lazy and of inferior vigour. As the wind does not blow down a rocky mountain, so Mara does not overthrow one who lives, seeing the unlovely as lovely, whose senses are controlled, who is moderate in food, and who is filled with faith and earnest effort. Okay, so there are actually a couple of other verses as well that I'm going to make reference to later on, but these are the main ones that we're going to look at this evening. And so I thought I'd start off by, for me there's a kind of an obvious thing that stands out here, which is the Buddha talks about Mara. So that's in the first line. So just as the wind blows down a weak tree, so Mara overthrows one who lives for the pursuit of pleasure, etc., etc. And I've put this in brackets because basically these verses are a kind of composite of the two translations. I found some bits helpful, some bits not helpful. So these are a kind of composite of the two translations. But both of them talk about Mara. So who here has heard of Mara before? Put your hand up if you've heard of Mara. Okay, put your hand up if you've not heard of Mara. Okay, so a few of you haven't heard of Mara. So I'm going to spend quite a bit of time talking about Mara, basically. And I'm going to just do this for the moment. Because it's a bit like that thing, you know, when there's a screen, like when the football's on in a pub or something, like you can't quite help yourself but look at the football, even though your friend's sat in front of you. So look at the friend, don't look at the football. So Mara, for those of you that haven't heard of Mara, is, what I'll do is I'll tell you a story about Mara, and then I'll kind of draw out a little bit about who he is and why we need to be concerned about him, basically. And partly for the benefit of you that haven't heard this before, but even for those of you that have, I think it's there's a particular story in the life of the Buddha called the attack of Mara. And who's heard this before, the attack of Mara? Yeah, so quite a few of you have, some of you haven't. Okay. So Mara does actually turn up later in the Buddha's life after the attack of Mara. And it's interesting, in the Dhammapada, the Buddha talks quite a lot about Mara. So it's not just in the attack of Mara that he turns up. But anyway, the sort of famous story is that the Buddha is on the cusp of enlightenment. So he's not yet the Buddha. He left home when he was 29, what we call the going forth. So he left his life of comfort, he left the palace, and he decided that he wanted to sort of turn his back on a life of luxury, and he wanted to find a life of deeper meaning, and he wanted to find the answer to human suffering. And he went forth, and for years and years, cut a long story short, he tried different things. He went very, very deep into meditation states. He tried practicing austerities where he was sort of torturing the body in order to free the mind. And he decided that none of that was really working. And then he sits down and he makes a vow. And I think that's important. So he makes this commitment, and he says, I think it's something like, may blood and flesh dry up, and only bone and sinew remain, but I will not move from this spot until I've attained full enlightenment. And he sits down, and it's said that through the course of the night, his consciousness starts to deepen, and his mind starts to transform, and he goes deeper and deeper and deeper, and he's on the cusp of enlightenment. And then what happens? Mara turns up, exactly, yeah. So Mara turns up, and Mara is this kind of, he's sort of a demon. You could think of it in that way. And, we'll talk a bit about this, because there's lots of different ways of viewing Mara. But in the story, he's kind of like a demon, he's kind of like a monster, and he's also he has these tremendous forces at his disposal. So the first thing he does is he comes at the Buddha with all of these, with his sort of armies, basically. So all of these horrendous, really ugly-looking beings sort of come at the Buddha, and they have what are those things, like slingshots and arrows, and they attack the Buddha, basically. And you've all heard the story. What happens? Go on, Peter.
The arrows turn into flowers.
That's right, yeah. So the Buddha is unmoved. He just sat there in complete awareness. So he's aware of what's happening, but he doesn't react in any way. And the arrows sort of come within the Buddha's aura, and they transform into flowers, as Peter said, and they just fall at his feet, which is a beautiful image, isn't it? I never fail to be moved by that image of this idea of somehow Mara's arrows and these, whatever's being hurled at the Buddha just transforming. They don't just miss, they transform, and I think that's important. I'll come back to that later. So that hasn't worked, so Mara tries again, and what he does is he tries to tempt the Buddha with his lovely daughters. So Mara's lovely daughters turn up, and they sort of dance in front of the Buddha, and they say, what are you doing? Sitting in enlightenment, like, come with us, we'll show you a good time, kind of thing. And the Buddha again is unmoved, and he sits there, and they have to admit to themselves that they're sort of powerless over the Buddha, basically. So they skulk off, and Mara's really annoyed by this point. So then the last thing that he does is he tries to undermine the Buddha's confidence. So he basically starts sort of taunting the Buddha and saying to him, well, who are you to gain enlightenment? What do you think you're doing? Who are you even? You're not worthy of enlightenment. What makes you think that you've got the right to sit on this place where Buddhas before you have gained enlightenment? Who even are you? And the Buddha sits there, and for those of you that have seen sort of images of the Buddha or statues of the Buddha in this position where he's touching the earth, this is called the earth-touching mudra, or the earth-touching sort of hand position. This is what the Buddha's doing, is he's touching the earth, and he summons the earth goddess. So the earth goddess comes up out of the earth, and the earth goddess appears, and she's his witness. So the earth goddess, who's depicted as being very beautiful, she's sometimes depicted as being green in colour. And she says, well, actually, I'm bearing witness to the Buddha's right to gain enlightenment. I've seen this man practice over, many, many lifetimes. He's put in the work, he's put in the practice, and this is the natural result of what he's done. Actually, he does have the right to gain enlightenment. And Mara's completely defeated at that point. And in some of the stories in the tradition, it's sort of faintly comic. Like Mara sort of goes off kind of muttering to himself, basically, and he's a little bit dejected. And that's not the last we see of Mara. But at this point, that's the last we see of Mara. And the defeat of Mara is what kind of leads the way for the Buddha to gain enlightenment, basically. So there's a few things that I want to pick out about that, and just kind of talking about Mara. So one is the metaphor of the flowers transforming and what that means. The other thing is looking at Mara's tactics and what he does, and also looking at commitment and why it's important that the Buddha has made a commitment. So let me ask all of you, who is Mara? And why? It's interesting, isn't it, that these are close to the words of the Buddha, And the Buddha actually talks about Mara. So it's not just that, however long after the story, like hundreds of years after, so it was an oral tradition for hundreds of years. And then at a certain point, these teachings started being committed to text. And, we have them in written form now. But the Buddha himself actually talked about Mara over and over again in the suttas. So it's interesting that he views what happened in those terms. Like, who do we think Mara actually is? Yes?
I think it's your thinking mind and your ego. That's what I
So it's your thinking mind and your ego. Yeah?
Which is the same.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I already have concluded what Mara is and what the arrows are and what the girls are.
Okay, well,
Also,
maybe
but-
hold
yeah.
off on that. But yeah, so just staying with who Mara is for the moment. So it's like your thinking
Your
mind,
thoughts,
your ego, you could say.
your doubts, your
Right,
thoughts.
so that's a little bit more, isn't it, when you say it's your doubts? So that's slightly
like-
different.
The
Okay,
mind.
great, thank you. Brian?
No, I was going to say similar thing. Like I think it's aspects of your thinking mind and ego. It's just like
Yeah.
this, because you have to lose things that you have to put up. It's like you lose your sense of self, don't you? If you're going to become enlightened, and so it's all the doubts and fears about. I don't know, whatever she said.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So your doubts, you could say your doubts and your fears again, yeah.
The things that you have to leave behind in order to become enlightened. The things that are keeping you in
Right,
this body.
okay, yeah. Anyone else? Yeah, go on.
Attachment.
So your attachments, yeah, okay. Go on.
The things you crave. Sorry. The things you crave.
The things you crave, okay, yeah.
Unwholesome thoughts.
Unwholesome thoughts, yeah,
Not
so
the
there could be,
wholesome ones.
yeah. Go on, yeah.
I think it's quite a classical shadow figure. So rather
Yeah.
than the ego itself, the things the ego.
Yeah, that's right. So when you say shadow figure, could you say a little bit more, or what you mean by that?
So the repressed antithesis of the ego.
Right, okay.
So everything the ego doesn't want to accept about itself.
Right,
will
okay.
come into the
So
shadow.
things that we don't want to accept, or, yeah. Ruby, go on, you were going to say something.
I was going to say shadow self, but he's
Yeah,
a lot
yeah.
better than
Yeah. So that's all interesting, isn't it? So we've got like people saying the ego, it's unhelpful thoughts, it's like a shadow, and this isn't sort of exclusive to Buddhism. You know, the story of the Buddha's enlightenment, in a way, it's kind of a universal story, isn't it? It's like the sort of the victory of it's like the victory of somebody that goes deeper somehow, and or almost like a kind of a spiritual victory in a sense. I mean, I think it's fair to say something like Mara is the personification, or you could say demonification. I don't know if that's actually a word. But the sort of the making into a being of that part of us that doesn't want to make progress, basically. So, it's a little bit like what you were saying. When we start to make progress on the path, there will be part of us that doesn't want that. So sometimes it's a little bit like, I don't know if you can all relate to this, I'm sure it's not just me. There's a part of you that really wants to make progress. There's a part of you that wants to come to the Buddhist Center, for example. There's a part of you when you wake up in the morning, you really want to meditate. And there's a part of you that really wants to stay under the duvet. There's a part of you that wants to be kind. And there's a part of you that thinks, oh, can I afford it? And it's somehow, there are those sorts of thoughts. And then there are kind of like the like you say, the dialogue that goes with that. Like, is this really what you want to be doing? Surely it'd just be much more fun to just sit and watch Netflix, or, am I even worthy of this? Am I actually even able to do this? And I think it's interesting that, I'm going to look at this from a couple of different angles, but one of the interesting things about how Mara tries to tempt the Buddha is that it's first of all with, he sort of attacks him with this army, and then he sends his daughters, and then he tries to undermine his confidence. And they are basically like representations of traditional hindrances in meditation. So you've got, in meditation, 3 of the 5 hindrances are desire for sense experience, which is like Mara's lovely daughters. You've got ill will, which is like the sort of the Mara's warriors attacking the Buddha, and then you've got doubt and indecision, basically, and that's what Mara's trying to do with undermining the Buddha's confidence. But I also think what's interesting about it, and I just thought of this while putting this talk together, is that thinking about it in this way, so thinking about Mara as a sort of as an aspect of ourselves, the thing about that is it's personal, isn't it? So Mara isn't actually anything outside of you. It's helpful to think of it in that way. In terms of the myth, it's like, well, it's this demon that comes along and somehow it's like an external figure. But actually, how it really is in real life is like Mara is an aspect of you. And because of that, Mara knows exactly how to get you, basically. Yeah, Mara knows all of your weaknesses. Mara knows what you're prone to. Mara knows exactly how your mind works. So in reality, when you're facing Mara, it's really difficult because it's a part of you coming from you, trying to trip you up, if that makes sense. And I was thinking about this, and this is interesting in relation to the Buddha. So Mara tries to tempt the Buddha, first of all, by sending his armies in. Now, the Buddha was a warrior. This is the thing. Most people don't think about the Buddha in this way because, you see these pink fluffy Buddhas in the window of liberty or whatever, and it all looks very peaceful, doesn't it? And the Buddha sits there with this lovely serene smile. And, the Buddha was a warrior. He came from the warrior caste. He was a Kshatriya, which meant he was born to be a warrior. He was born to be a soldier. And that's what he turned his back on. And that would have been difficult for him. That would have been a challenge for him to turn his back on that. And Mara knows right how to do that. Like, he's getting right into the Buddha by saying, right, I'm gonna throw you off course. I'm gonna start a fight. And I know that you're a warrior, so you'll want to fight back, basically. And that's what he's banking on. So there's that. So the Buddha's a warrior, that's one thing. And for the first however many years of his life, the first 29 years of the Buddha's life, he lived in absolute luxury with, there are suttas where the Buddha himself talks about for the 4 months of the rainy season, never leaving this palace where he just, there were kind of dancing girls and every sensual delight that he could think about, and that was his life. So again, Mara knows this, and he's trying to tempt the Buddha in that way. So I just thought that was it's a little bit interesting, isn't it? That it's not kind of an abstract thing. It's actually it's personal to you, and the story actually tells us that, basically. So what I thought we could do now, which might be just to get you to sort of participate a little bit and think about this in relationship to you, is I'd like you to get into pairs, and I'd like you to think for a few minutes about how does Mara manifest for you. So Mara will look, there will be some common Maras, okay? Mara will wear a similar outfit when he appears for some of us. But for you in particular, what does Mara look like? So when you are thrown off course, when you're distracted, when you have doubts, when you seem to be making progress and, Mara turns up, what does it look like? What are some of the thoughts that you have, or, who is Mara for you and how does he manifest? So maybe we can get into pairs. Maybe you could get into a pair with someone that you haven't met before. And and what does Mara look like for you? How does he manifest for you? And we'll spend a few minutes just looking at that. Okay, couple more minutes. Okay, great. So I wonder if any of you would like to share some of your maras with the rest of the class. I mean, first of all, to say I think it's nice, this exercise. Partly it's nice just getting to, stimulating a bit of discussion around this, getting to know other people. But part of what's really useful is actually is learning to name and see what it is for you, actually. So you were talking about shadow aspect. The thing about shadow is, obviously, it's something we can't see. That's why we call it the shadow, to use that archetype. what we do when we name something is we bring it into the light, and then it has a little bit less power over us. But I'll say a little bit about that in a moment. But Peter, you were going to...
Oh, yeah. I don't know what I was going to say now. Dancing girls, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Should we just leave it at that? Peter's Mara is dancing girls. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Sense. Is that like craving for sense experience, you mean, or actually dancing girls?
And jealousy as well, I think, comes up, like, you know,
Okay.
kind of people that are very successful and things like
Right.
that. I think that's in there somewhere.
So comparing yourself with other people as well.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Thank you. Talib, yeah.
Yeah, so my Mara, I suppose, like undermines me
Mm.
discussing this,
Yeah.
and I suppose makes me feel like others are better or I'm lacking. So the comparison part as well, definitely.
And is that sort of in kind of spiritual life in inverted commas, or general life, or both, or
I guess everything really,
Yeah.
because I don't know how to make the difference really.
yeah,
Yeah, but I think in everything, and then self-doubt, I guess as well.
yeah,
It's like, and then I usually like picture someone else, just like a made-up character who is like, oh no, this person would actually be better at this thing. Sometimes it's not even a real person. It's
right,
I don't
okay,
know if that makes sense, but kind of outsourcing this thing.
right, okay. So what would an example of that be?
Well, I don't know. I guess before, if I wanted to find a job, then I'd apply and then think. Then I just create this person in my mind. Oh, there's a person that has all these skills, and
Yeah.
maybe they're more good looking, and they speak more languages, or they're more cunning, or
Okay.
just all those things. And
Yeah,
I create
yeah,
this person, and and it's like it's as though that person really exists, and
Yeah.
he's my competition. And I'm just like, oh, you know what? I'm not even gonna do this
Because that fictional person is
Yeah,
going to
'cause
get
he
the
already
job.
got- he
Yeah,
already
yeah,
got the
okay.
job, I can't
Okay. I mean, it's funny when we say stuff like it is funny, isn't it? But it's funny because it's true. Like, it's funny because we all do things like that, isn't it? That's what's funny about it in a way. But V, go on.
Yeah, I think I can really relate to the inner critic, and I think I've just been saying it particularly seems to come when you've done something that actually you think you've done quite well, like you say you made progress or you had success or something,
Yeah.
and then there's this instant, oh, but it wasn't quite as good as you say, or it wasn't as good as that, or you're not really that great at that, and there'll be like 5 different things coming up, and well, you might have been okay at this, but there's all these other things
Yeah.
that,
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Yeah. Anyone else? Any other Maras? Go on, Ruby.
I was going to say, like, I can get quite obsessive and narrow-minded about things, and what was I going to say? Overthinking things more than they need to be thought about.
Okay. And that can sort of hinder you in some ways, do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about, like, at the minute I'm working in a charity shop and I'm learning about how to price things correctly.
Yeah.
And I think I can get quite too focused on the correct way to price things, and actually it's okay to take a step back.
Yeah, like that can be a hindrance, is trying to do things too perfectly, sort of thing. Yeah. Like, you sort of imagine if the Buddha was kind of sat there and thinking, well, I can't gain enlightenment because my posture's not quite correct yet, or something.
Exactly. It's like that.
Yeah.
But
Great.
it's okay.
Yeah, great, thank you. So it's good to hear all of that, isn't it? And what heartens me partly is like that we're all laughing about this, because I think that's one of the things that you find in the tradition quite a lot, is that it's encouraged. There's quite a lot of humour in the Pali Canon. It's quite interesting. These ancient writings about the Buddha, they're very formulaic, these writings. Like, you often start, thus have I heard, and then it's kind of a list of things. And you can kind of read these ancient writings and sort of feel they're a little bit dry. But lately I've been studying sort of the old Pali Suttas quite a lot, and there's actually quite a lot of dry humour in them. It's quite interesting. And around Mara, like, there definitely is a lot of humour. It's like the Buddha sort of talks about Mara after his enlightenment as almost like this sort of annoying old friend that keeps sort of popping up. And I think having that attitude, it's sort of having a sense of openness, a sense of playfulness, and a sense of humour is really, really helpful. Because what isn't helpful is when we start to make a problem out of a problem out of a problem. Like when there's a difficulty, when there's a negative voice, when Talib's having his, like this, I can almost imagine this person I can imagine in your mind, Talib, this sort of like Clark Kent type character is coming along and, actually just say, if you're able to see it and name it and say, oh, it's him again, or it's Mara again, actually having that sense of openness, and not like, because what you can do is spin off then into like, oh, there I go again, I always do this, I'm not good enough, this is what always happens. And that just encourages this kind of sense of tightness. So having that sense of openness, that sense of playfulness, I think is really, really helpful. And just to say a little bit on what you were saying, V, about the inner critic. I hadn't planned to say this, but I think one of the things with that is that's why it's really good to be part of a Sangha, because I think we all have a very strong inner critic. And what I've found after years and years of being around this community is, I really trust and look up to and care about the people in this community. And they're always telling me that I'm like a really nice guy and a decent guy. And I didn't believe that for a really long time. I have a lot of negative self-views. I don't have as much confidence in myself as other people seem to have in me. But after years and years and years of people that will tell you the truth, telling you that actually you're doing pretty well, you're a decent guy, people like you, I was like, oh, maybe it's true then, And I think that's part of why it's really lovely being part of a community, is actually being around people that will give you that encouragement and will listen to you and will slowly wither and sort of deflate your inner critic so that you can actually see yourself more, your self-view comes more and more into line over the years with other people's view of you. Yes, go on.
It just seems from what everyone's saying, it's got this, Mara has this character of like making up, so like either creating or making up for something.
That's right.
But it seems like what's coming out of that is it's actually quite complementary to your conscious attitude. So it's like you have to go through Mara, not get rid of it. Exactly. And we will come to that. Yeah, absolutely. But in a sense, I think that's right. And in another way, I think just to sort of clarify that, I think the point is that it's what Mara is saying isn't necessarily ever based in fact. That's the thing. Like there will be a thing that is sort of, might be to do with your doubts or your lack of confidence in yourself. But like, if you don't mind me picking on you again, Talib, it's like with that example, it's like, well, it's like, where does that come from in a sense? Sometimes the things that we think about ourselves are ridiculous. Like I remember when I was in university, I don't know how this happened, but I had a conversation with somebody one night. I was out in a club one night and I had a conversation with somebody, and then I think I saw them about a month later at a party, and I thought that they blanked me at a party. And then I remember having this storyline from then on, that person doesn't like me. I must have said something to them that night that they didn't like, and then they blanked me like a month later, and they don't like me. So I ended up avoiding that person for the rest of my time at university. And then about 20 years later, they got in touch with me on Facebook, and they were like, oh, I always really liked you, you're such a nice guy, And I just thought, God, what an absolute plum, And, that's the sort of thing that our minds do, isn't it? We just make up these stories about other people and ourselves, and often it's like, what a waste. Like the Buddha would just look at us and just say, oh, what a waste of time and energy, And that sort of brings me to my next point, really, which is around sort of having a sense of perspective. So one of the things that struck me about this metaphor, so to go back to the verse, we had this thing about Mara blowing down a weak tree. So if it's a weak tree, Mara overthrows us, and he overthrows us, people that if we live in the pursuit of pleasure, seeing the unlovely as lovely. So I'll come to that in a moment. But one of the things I thought about is such a good metaphor, isn't it? Because
why a tree gets blown down is because for two things basically. It doesn't have strong enough roots. So that's why Mara is able to overthrow the tree, is it doesn't have strong enough roots. And in order for those roots to grow, what does a plant need to grow roots?
Water.
It needs water, that's one thing. So it needs to be in water or soil, but it also needs something else as well.
Sunlight.
It needs sunlight, yeah, exactly. So I'm like a real houseplant nerd. If you come to my house, I've basically, my kitchen and my bedroom is full of like glasses and cups and small pots and things like that, because I'm always like pruning and propagating and trying to make new plants, and I'm doing that all the time. Really, really love all of that. And I'm always like experimenting to see what makes the plants root, basically, when you prune them. And I've got this rubber plant at the moment that I've massively pruned back. So my rubber plant was like, almost as tall as that ceiling there. So I had to prune it back. And I'm trying to propagate the leaves at the moment. But the difficulty is you can't propagate a leaf. You can't do multiple leaves at the same time. Sorry, I will talk about the Dharma in a minute. But you can't do multiple leaves at the same time, because if you do that, then they're blocked from the sun. So the sun needs to be able to hit the leaves in order for them to root, so that you can then plant them. And I think this is a really lovely metaphor, because for me, the metaphor, the sun is like a metaphor for something higher. It's like inspiration, or like a bigger perspective, basically. That's what the sun is a metaphor for. And I think this makes sense when you go back to the verse and you look at this line of, the pursuit of pleasure, which we'll come to, but seeing the unlovely as lovely. So that's a bit of a weird line, isn't it, in the verse? You could look at that and think, well, what does that mean, seeing the unlovely as lovely? And what it means is it's about having a sense of perspective. So if we're just pursuing pleasure, like fairly meaningless pleasure all the time, there's nothing wrong with pleasure usually per se, but it's about where it's taking you and what it's doing to your mind. And from the Buddha's perspective, most of the time, what we view as lovely is actually unlovely. And it's not even that it's sort of like often, ugly or harmful, but it's from the enlightened mind's perspective, us sort of just trying to just get as much pleasure as we can, and, just trying to have an easy life and opting for the easy option and doing, whatever it is that we do. From that perspective, it doesn't look good, basically. It's like the unlovely as lovely, because from the Buddha's perspective, there is so much more. It's like the radiance of the sun compared to like, a little cheap electric nightlight or something like that, So it's all about seeing that with a sense of perspective, basically. And I think the other thing about that metaphor as well is, if we go back to the plant metaphor, the tree metaphor here, it takes time to grow roots. So I think we need to not be too hard on ourselves, but how do we grow those roots? It takes time to do that. And, we do that through practicing ethics, we do that through practicing meditation, we do that through being part of a community. But Dana Uttar was talking in the first part of the class about just cultivating that level of awareness. And as we do that more and more, we start to grow more roots and shoots, and we become a sort of stronger tree that has a different perspective when Mara arises and is able to sort of withstand that blast. Now, I thought I'd pick up on something else here as well, which is towards the end of this verse. So it talks about being, two things, immoderate in food, lazy and of inferior vigour. So put your hands up if you're lazy and of inferior vigour. So what does that mean? I thought I'd mention the thing about being immoderate in food as well. So what you have to bear in mind with this is that the Buddha would have been talking to his monks. So this would be like the main sort of, the main thing that the monks would probably get a bit hung up on, because they didn't have any possessions. They weren't allowed to go on dating apps and things like that. So the thing that they would get kind of hung up on is their food. And this quite often comes up in the suttas, where the monks are getting really obsessed about, are they going to get enough food? Are they going to get the right kind of food? All of that sort of thing. So you could say that that's a stand-in a way, for us just getting a bit obsessed with getting as much pleasure as we can. But it's the Buddha talking to his monks. And then this phrase, lazy, I thought this is quite interesting, because it means something very specific. So it doesn't just mean laziness in the ordinary sense. What do you think it means? So when it says, whose senses are uncontrolled, who is immoderate in food, lazy and of inferior vigour, what do you think that might mean? Go on.
I don't know if this is right or if anyone would agree, but maybe it's just like trying to say it's a choice. So you have the choice to do this thing that, because being lazy doesn't mean sitting anywhere else. It might just mean going out and spending a bunch of time with people that you don't really care about, or stuff that doesn't really kind of serve your journey.
Yeah, that's right.
That is sometimes the laziest route, right? So it's probably, I don't know, that's how I understand it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, so it could be laziness in the ordinary sense of the world, but it's also what you were talking about, which is much more. It's a sense of being lazy from that perspective of that bigger perspective, which is kind of like a spiritual laziness, basically. And the way to think about that is that could mean actually that you're really busy. So often, some people are really busy, but they're being spiritually lazy, which means they're not being mindful. They're not choosing to do things that will foster their growth. What they are, you're filling up your time basically with things that keep you very, very busy, but they don't actually lead anywhere. And in fact, sometimes they lead you to harm. So there's a kind of spiritual laziness which can be can involve sort of being very busy. But when we have that perspective, so I'm going to go back to the tree image again. When we have that perspective, and I think this is one of the things that we're doing when we practice ethics and when we practice meditation. What we're doing, it's a bit like Pranyamanas was saying in the break, actually, when he was talking about going on retreat. Like, it's interesting, isn't it, thinking about that thing about laziness. So a lot of the time, people maybe who don't go on retreat, when you talk to your family about going on retreat and you try and explain what you're doing, I think the word retreat isn't very helpful anyway, because it just makes it sound like you're going to like a health spa or something like that. But the idea of like, well, why would you go somewhere and like not really do anything, or why would you turn your phone off for 2 weeks, or why would you go somewhere and just meditate, and somewhere where there's like no TV or no entertainment, or like, why would you do that? And in a way, sometimes I think that the sort of topsy-turvy view of that would be that you're just being lazy by sort of going and not doing anything. But actually, it's the opposite. So actually, by doing less, sometimes we clear the space for something more meaningful to arise. And it needs space to arise. And I think, particularly in meditation, but actually outside of meditation as well, when we create more space, what we do is we create a space in which something else can arise. And we're opening ourselves up to that sort of higher sense of values, or up to a bigger perspective. And I think also for me, like being around people who I look up to and who are wiser than I am, that also sort of provides that bigger perspective, and it allows me to see in action what it looks like when people have been practicing longer than I have, when people are more ethical than I am. And somehow that sort of clears a path towards them that you can move towards. And that allows for higher ideals to sort of take root in you, basically. And then when Mara decides to appear, you can decide what to do. I'll give you an example of this. So a few years ago, this is about 4 years ago now, I was, so pre-pandemic, with the work that I do, I used to spend like 2 or 3 months of the year working in India every year. So I work for a charity called Karuna, who some of you will know, and I work as a program manager for the charity, which means that I oversee the implementation of the, so we send money to organisations in India, Nepal and Bangladesh, and they work with very, very poor communities, basically delivering projects around like education and helping people that are marginalised because of the caste system into meaningful work and so on. Really, really wonderful work. And I haven't been to India since this. I came back just before the first lockdown. I'm hoping to go back in October, but I'm still doing that work. It's just been remote for the last couple of years. But anyway, a few years ago, about 4 years ago, I think it was, I was in India on a work trip, and I was in Delhi, and I was just about to travel over to Calcutta, and I was going to work with this organisation for a week. Well, actually, I wasn't going to work with this organisation, but I was going with a consultant who were going to take this organisation through quite a difficult sort of planning process, basically. We were trying to plan the organisation's strategy for the next 4 years, and we were using this particular methodology to do it, and it was going to be very, very challenging, but that didn't matter because I had a consultant that was going to do it for me, basically. And so great, okay, I was going to meet the consultant in Delhi, and then we were going to travel over to Calcutta together, and we were going to take this organisation through this planning process. And while I was in Delhi, I couldn't get hold of the consultant, basically, and I didn't know what was wrong, and he wasn't answering his phone, and I was thinking, oh goodness, what's happened? And I eventually managed to speak to his wife, and his wife told me that he'd contracted this disease called chikungunya, which I don't know if anybody knows what chikungunya is. It's an awful disease that you get in South Asian countries which can kill you. And it's horrible. You get it from this like particular mosquito that's about that big, and it's black and white. It's a really nasty looking thing. Anyway, he'd contracted this disease. He's fine now, by the way. He completely recovered. But so he's in hospital and he's not going anywhere, basically. So I'm there and I'm thinking, oh no, like what are we going to do? What am I going to do? You know, and so I sat down and I thought about it, and my first response was just like, I was really like, oh God, you know, what am I going to do? We've set this whole thing up. We really need to take this organisation through this process. But, you know, we can't do it because the consultant's not there. And I know that if we don't do it, then we might not get this large grant that's coming to the organisation and blah, 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 you know. So this was like a real test for me. It was a real test of my ideals, because I knew that I could reasonably say, look, there's nothing I can do. The consultant's ill. You know, we can't do anything, basically. And I somehow knew that that wasn't good enough as well. So I phoned the organisation and I said, look, this is the situation, you know, this person's not able to come, we're not able to do this, but I wonder if between the two of us, we can actually, you know, between the organisation and myself, we can figure it out, basically. Like if I go there, maybe I've got enough knowledge and you've got enough knowledge of this process that actually we can go through it together, and let's just see what happens, you know, let's see what we get at the end of it. And it was really interesting for me, because there was a part of me that thought, oh no, actually, I'd rather just take the easy option. I'd rather just not bother, basically. You know, I'll just have a week in Delhi and go sightseeing or something like that. Really briefly, I just thought, nah, no, that's not good enough. And anyway, I went to the organisation. We spent a week, and it was great. It went really, really well. And at the end of it, you know, we had something really, really good that we could use, basically. But I was only able to do that because I had a really, really clear sense of my kind of ideals and what I was prepared to do and not prepared to do as well. And also, and this kind of takes us on to one of the next verses that I wanted to talk about. So we've got these two verses here talking about how Mara will overthrow us if we're like a weak tree or not. And the next verse that I want to look at is about mindfulness, and it says, "Mindfulness is the way to the immortal, unmindfulness the way to death. Those who are mindful do not die, whereas the unmindful are like the dead." And the word for mindfulness, so in this version here we've got the original Pali, which is the language close to the language that the Buddha would have spoken, and the Pali word that's used is apramada. So mindfulness gets translated usually in two ways. There's two sort of Pali words, sati and apramada. So sati means something like awareness of the body and mind, but apramada means also awareness of consequences. So you're actually aware of what happens when you respond in a certain way. So when you respond to Mara, when he pops up, you actually have an awareness about where that actually is going to go. And I think this was crucial for that episode that I was sort of giving the example of. So I was really aware of what would happen if I didn't do this. And I really, really care deeply about the people in that project. And I was thinking about the young women that are kind of able to access an education, people from a very, very poor community that are able to go to school. And I just thought, well, if I don't do this, that's not going to happen, basically. And there will be lots of people, literally, that maybe don't get an education because I want to choose to stay in Delhi that week and sightsee. And I just thought, okay, that's not going to happen, basically. Okay. So, just to say a little bit more about Mara, just going back to the image of the earth goddess, and I'm going to start to wrap up with this. The earth goddess is sometimes depicted as being green, and I think that's really significant as well. So what that signifies to me is that these processes are completely natural. So if we're able to develop mindfulness and we're able to develop an awareness and we're able to see what happens in our mind and we're able to name it, what then happens is that gets transformed. So when we, like the Buddha, if we are able to remain in awareness but not respond, that then gets transformed into something deeper and something more beautiful. And I think the greenness indicates that. So it's like a natural process. It's not some supernatural thing that happens. It's not some abstract concept. It's actually a natural process that happens in the mind. And the victory over Mara is, as you said, it's the transformation of negative mental states. So it's not the avoidance of negative mental states. It's the transformation of negative mental states. And when you realize that, you can't lose, basically. It's like a win-win situation because positive mental states are to be enjoyed and negative mental states are to be investigated and transformed. So it's a little bit like the sort of ancient science of alchemy, you know, where you take those sort of base ingredients and you turn it into gold, basically. So it's our negative mental states are the raw material for change, and they are actually the fuel for progress on the path. So we shouldn't kind of fear our negative mental states, but what we need to do is come at them with an attitude of kind of openness and curiosity and investigation. And where that can lead us is, it's the potential for that is infinite. And, you know, what we can even do sometimes is even choose to put ourselves in situations where you actually test yourself and where you know negative mental states are going to arise and that you're actually going to work with that. So going on retreat would be one example of that. So you're choosing to positively challenge yourself by putting yourself in a situation where you know that you're going to have to look at your negative mental states. And you're going to have to sort of work with those and transform them, basically. So the title of this talk, I was told, was Escaping Laziness for a Life of Meaning. And I hope I've sort of said something about that. So laziness means different things, doesn't it? But one of the things it means is sort of spiritual laziness. And where meaning comes from is actually in the sort of transformation of those negative mental states. So that's not easy, but it is fulfilling, sort of choosing to come at our negative mental states in that way. Okay, so let's just sit for a couple of minutes at the end. And we'll just sit quietly for a couple of minutes before we end this evening. So just getting in touch with our bodies, just being present in our physical experience. And just ending the evening on a kind of note of mindfulness, of awareness. So just a few minutes of presence before we go back out and make our journeys home. Just being aware of the body, feeling the weight of your body on the cushion or the mat. And being aware of your breath, just taking a few mindful breaths. We'll just sit like this in awareness for a couple of minutes. So when you're ready, just opening your eyes. So let's leave it there for this evening. And nice to see you all, and wish you all a good week and a pleasant journey home. Come back next week and we'll be looking at more verses from the Dhammapada.
Thank you.